I mean, just to give everyone a little better context, the mandala offering is normally given at the beginning of a more formal teaching. Yeah, as a kind of request for the teaching, and yeah, it's a tradition that spans back many centuries, millennia. I was just making the comment last week because you do have a nice voice. So anyway, from my side, I don't I don't need a mandala, but from your side, it's probably good. It helps, as you said, Mary Ellen, to put your mind in a better space to receive the teachings. So anyway, we have a lot to cover, so let's jump in. So please, we'll just, in the usual way, adjust our motivation, thinking that the purpose of my life is to benefit all sentient beings, and in particular, we must actualize the highest state of enlightenment, because then and only then will we have all the skills, qualities, knowledge to guide sentient beings in the most effective way from the oceans of samsaric suffering to the state of enlightenment. And therefore, we're going to engage in this teaching in order that we can learn all the various practices that lead to the state of enlightenment, particularly the very profound teachings on thought transformation, and particularly transforming all of our experiences into bodhicitta. Okay. So, yeah, I think as many of you know, I've been here at Kopan now for 8 days. Tomorrow I go back to India. So it was on Wednesday. It was on a Wednesday when our kind Guru Lamzo Rinpoche stopped breathing. So on Wednesday now, there's even more prayers. I mean, in general, there are prayers going on 24 hours a day. But each Wednesday, there's even kind of more, and it's kind of bigger attendance. But as I said, our best sort of puja, right? Our best prayers that we can do is to try to follow the example that Lamzo Rinpoche led, following in his footsteps. And those of you with the good fortune to have met Rinpoche or seen him in action, as it were, then you'll know that very extraordinary in the world that Rinpoche, embodied bodhicitta in all of his actions. Made bodhicitta his real life kind of heart practice. And in his teachings, emphasize this again and again. So it was interesting. Now looking back, of course, at the beginning of the COVID in 2020, he had started a series on Lojong, in other words, the thought transformation teachings. And there ended up being, I think, there was at least 137, I don't know. But that body of teachings, which is now all available online, both in video form and in transcripts, became kind of the how do you say, magnum opus, the magnum opus, the kind of real seminal work, and a kind of legacy for us to now study and listen to, read, and put into practice. So one of the very first teachings in that series was trying to emphasize how all the problems we saw in the world were a reminder that we have to practice. All of at that point, the COVID was just spreading very rapidly. People didn't know what to do. There was a lot of fear, a lot of uncertainty. Cases were growing exponentially. And so it was like, yeah, I think many of you remember, but the borders locking down, and the point is, you see the external world having all these problems, right? Acute suffering. Then the very essence of the one level of mind training, transforming problems into the path. One way we do that, and we saw in the Shantideva quote, it should persuade us to practice more, accumulate virtue, and also abandon negativity, right? Because keeping in mind the teachings on karma, everything we experience is the ripening effect of previously accumulated actions, be they good or bad. So that very, that quintessential stanza we keep coming back to from Dhammapada, do not commit a single negative action, accumulates perfect, pure actions, right? Thoroughly subdue one's mind. This is the teaching of Buddha. That's the whole path. So inasmuch as we can then use our suffering experiences to then remind us of that, then very, very, very good. Yeah. So that's one level of the transforming problems into the path. Then, of course, when we start talking about in the Mahayana context, developing compassion for others, that's very good. When we see ourselves experiencing problems, then to this practice of Tonglen, right? Taking on the suffering of others, well, really means at our level, on a mental level, we're actually not actually taking away someone's problems, but we're more developing a willingness to do that. So when we have sickness, we would think, may my experiencing this sickness, may I be able to do that on behalf of all sentient beings. May they be free from sickness, and may I be the only one to have to experience this. And then similarly, the flip side, when we experience happiness, we can even think, oh, even something quite small. We have a nice cup of coffee in the morning. We can experience like that on behalf of all sentient beings, having an aspiration. May all sentient beings, have delicious drinks. That phrase, by the way, that's in Shantideva's Bodhisattva Charyavatara, right? You guys know, right? So we don't have to think, um, you see, we do wish, although when we talk about samsaric suffering, we understand that all the happiness within samsara is in the nature of suffering. It's ultimately not satisfying. It ultimately will let us down. We can't pin our hopes on that for the ultimate happiness. Nonetheless, you know, having delicious drinks or not having delicious drinks, we want sentient beings to have delicious drinks, right? Yeah. So we don't just as we go through life, we don't hold that as the end goal, but aspire to more, liberation, enlightenment. Similarly, our aspiration for sentient beings includes even the very slight happiness. It says in the text, even like on a hot day, experiencing a cool breeze, and it's like, oh, that's nice, right? We want sentient beings to even have that, right? So then, everything from that all the way to complete enlightenment. So then, when we experience a delicious drink, then any good thing that we experience, we can say, oh, may all sentient beings have this as well. Yeah. So that's kind of the essence, I think you can say. There's a stanza in the Lama Chupa where it says, along the lines of, please bless me that whatever I experience, may it become a cause for increasing the two types of bodhicitta, right? And so we have the two types of bodhicitta: conventional bodhicitta, which is the wish to achieve enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings, and ultimate bodhicitta, which is the mind realizing emptiness in the continuum of someone who has bodhicitta and the direct realization of emptiness, right? So, the other way, the other kind of mind training to go on the ultimate bodhicitta side is to remember the ultimate nature of reality. And all of those quote unquote break time meditations, viewing things as an illusion, viewing things as a dream, viewing things as a mirage, viewing things as merely by mind. And then the more we can cultivate that recognition and awareness throughout our daily life, then it helps. At the very least, I think my hypothesis is the strong grasping to true existence will be a little bit lessened if we're able to do that. So let's try. Okay, so with that, I promised last week that we would go through the 7-point mind training. And so I'd given you the homework from Liberation of the Palm of Your Hand, which of course you all did. Yeah? I'm seeing some big smiles. All right. So no fear, okay? what I thought we could just do is, just kind of do it in a little bit traditional way and actually go through this text. Okay. Okay. So, as all of you had read, right? Liberation of the palm of your hand is a little bit. It's unique compared to like Lamrim Chenmo, the great stages of the path to enlightenment by Lama Tsongkhapa. So both talk about these two systems of developing bodhicitta, the 7-point cause and effect instructions, and equalizing and exchanging self for others. But in Liberation of the Palm of Your Hand, Bhavonka Rinpoche, he, in the context of discussing the equalizing and exchanging self for others, he goes into this 7-point mind training text. Okay. So at this point, okay, you see, just at the top, he's finished the 7-point cause and effect instructions. And now he says, now I shall discuss the mind training system that uses interchange of self and others. Or in other words, equalizing and exchanging self for others. So this was the system of Shantideva, a great child of the victorious ones, means bodhisattva. Okay. So although you will develop bodhicitta if you train your mind according to the above 7-fold cause and effect method, we will still cover the system of interchange of self and others because this thought is so powerful. The earlier Kadampas used this technique. So why is this 7-fold, why is equalizing, exchanging self for others thought to be more powerful than the 7-point cause and effect instructions? Well, it's because if you remember, in the 7-point cause and effect instructions, when we first start with the recognition that all sentient beings have been our mother, remembering their kindness, wishing to repay their kindness. Okay, so it's still a little bit like conditional love, right? You've been kind to me in the past, therefore I'm going to be kind to you now, right? A little bit. And then, basically we think, well, all sentient beings have been kind to me in the past. I wish to repay their kindness. Therefore, I'm going to, benefit them. But the equalizing, exchanging self for others, it is, we're fundamentally interested in other people's well-being, not because they were kind to us, not because we're getting something out of it per se, but just that all beings want happiness and don't want to suffer. And that reason is enough that we're then interested to benefit them. We're interested to alleviate their suffering. And even then these techniques will include reflecting on the so-called, kindness of the enemy. The enemy is kind to us because they give us the opportunity to practice patience. The enemy is kind to us because they're an object of compassion. It doesn't need any sort of more profound reason than that. And therefore, it's really, the kind of the unconditional love, unconditional compassion. Okay. So here, what we usually call mind training refers particularly to the interchange of self and others and to giving and taking. So we had mentioned this. Here, lojong is mind training, right? But normally in the lojong text, it always will say Mahayana mind training. So tekchen lojong, right? Mahayana mind training. And we normally think of all the Buddhist teachings as being mind training on one level or another. But in the Mahayana context, we're particularly trying to develop the mind bodhicitta. And therefore, it's going to be using this more powerful method of equalizing, exchanging self-others, which was described in this engaging these bodhisattvas. We mentioned this, right? Anyone who wishes to quickly to protect both himself and others should practice the holy secret, exchange of self with others. And we had mentioned here, Pabonka Rinpoche is saying, in other words, since this practice would have been beyond the mind of an unfit vessel, from the time of the Tisha until that of Geshe Chekawa, the teaching was kept under a seal of secrecy. Right? Yeah. I think we mentioned this. Yeah, I talked about that last week, I think, right? Why was it a secret? And then why is it now spreading again? Yeah. So there are many texts about mind training, such as Poisons Conquered by the Peacock's Mind Training. Okay, so this, I'm not sure if it's even true, but there was a thought in ancient India that peacocks could ingest something that was poison and it not kill them. I don't know if that's true, but that was the thought. So you see, poison conquered by peacocks. What that means is, you see, normally poison, right, is very, very dangerous. But if somehow you can, like a peacock, transforming the poison so that it's not harmful anymore, and maybe they even get sustenance from it, right? So similarly, something that we normally don't like suffering. Suffering harms us. But if we are able, through this practice of mind training, can transform those normally undesirable things like suffering into the path, then it can serve as our sustenance on the spiritual practice, on the Dharma practice. Okay. So anyway, but that's another text. It's actually in there. There's a book. So Geshe Zopa, he translated both that and the Wheel of Sharp Weapons, and it's in text. I think that might even like Poison in the Peacock's Grove. I think it's named something like that. Anyway, very, very good translation of both of those texts. Wheel of Sharp Weapons, I think, is the basis of the mind training module in the basic program, if I'm not mistaken. So those of you who, maybe you've already done some modules of that, it's a more extensive study program within the FPMT. Okay. So if you practice this teaching, it will be even more beneficial than the one already covered. So I shall now teach the 7-point mind training using an older variant of the root text. So like this. On page 726, you'll have the full one. So older variant of the root text. So as you can imagine, some of these teachings, they were passed on from from student to disciple, and then there's a little bit variation that came, and one of the variations was that in terms of the ultimate bodhicitta and conventional bodhicitta, then the ultimate bodhicitta was discussed first. And then there is another difference that I remember, and maybe it'll become clear as we read through. But the text on kind of ultimate bodhicitta, like viewing everything as an illusion, there were an earlier version sort of discusses that more in the Chittamatra or mind-only school philosophical tenet. But of course, now we try to follow the Majjhimika, particularly Prasangika Majjhimika. Okay. So first, there are many ways of presenting this text. I shall follow the teaching lineage derived from Mulchu Dhammavajra and his disciples. I actually believe this should be Dharmabhadra, Mulchu Dharmabhadra. He was a great, very prolific master. He wrote many, many, many texts. Sarah May. And I wonder if the original Tibetan just says Mulchu, and then the translator put in Dhamma Vajra in a mistaken way. Okay, so first, the greatness of authors of this teaching. Okay, so remember, this is the Nalanda tradition. How did they teach a text? Talking about the greatness of the author, the greatness of the teaching, and then how to engage in such a teaching, right? So now, since he's talking about the 7-point mind training, it's like a teaching within the teaching, right? So this lineage came from Buddha Shakyamuni down to the great Atisha. He passed it on to Drum Tumpa under a seal of secrecy. Drum gave Lamrim teachings to his disciples in public, but passed this mind training down to Potawa and others in secret. Potawa passed it on to Langri Tangpa. Langri Tangpa was the author of the 8-point mind training, or 8 verses of mind training, which we went over last week. And then Geshe Sharawa. Sharawa gave his disciple Geshe Chekawa all the teachings on bodhicitta. These teachings were made public during Chekawa's lifetime. Okay, so actually the author of the 7-point mind training is Geshe Chekawa. And so it's here, it just shows how these teachings on equalizing, exchanging others, and developing bodhicitta, how they came to Geshe Chekawa, down from Shakyamuni Buddha. Okay, so Chekawa was born into the family of a great Nyingma, so another tradition within Tibetan Buddhism. Nyingma tantrists, and became very learned in the 5 sciences and so on, but this didn't satisfy him. He happened to see Langri Tangpa's mind training in 8 verses, which says, give the gains and victories to others, take the loss and defeats to yourself. Okay, so I think you remember that. So okay, you remember that from the 8 verses of mind training, right? This thought of taking taking the victory and then offering taking this defeat and offering the victory to others. Yeah. So then Chekawa then sought the meaning of this, but Langri Tangpa had already died. Then he met Langri Tangpa's successor, Sharawa. And requested instructions on mind training from him, and through his meditations developed bodhicitta in his mind stream. So there's a little something just I remember from the oral tradition, I should mention here. So as it says, Chekawa then set up the meaning of this this verse and went to find Langri Tangpa had already passed away, but this Geshe Sharawa, he was known as Langri Tangpa's successor. And so Geshe Chekawa was attending teachings, but Geshe Sharawa, I think he was giving a text, a commentary on Arya Asanga's Bodhisattva levels, okay? And, you know, or maybe even the hearer levels. Anyway, it was a text by Asanga, and in that text, there is no mention of these equalizing, exchanging self for others. And so he asked for an audience of Sharawa, and yeah, basically said that he had come across this quotation from the 8 verses of mind training, and Geshe Chekawa was actually was wondering, is there any source in the Indian treatises about equalizing, exchanging self for others? And Geshe Sharawa said yes. Well, first he was, you know, impressed that that Geshe Chekawa was interested in such teachings, and then said, "Oh yes, there are there is a source in the Indian treatises," and then pointed to the Ratnavali, the Precious Garland by Nagarjuna, and that was the half stanza we mentioned at the end of last week's session, where it was talking about may the suffering of sentient beings ripen on me, and may my happiness ripen on others. Okay. So then Chekawa gave this instruction to many lepers who cured themselves through their meditations. This teaching was even known as the leper's dharma. So Chekawa thought it was a great pity that this teaching was being kept so secret and taught in public. He committed it to writing as the 7-point mind training, dividing the teachings into 7 sections. It has been called the essence of nectar instruction, because this is the ultimate instruction on training the mind and will enable you to achieve the immortal state of Buddhahood. So here we had talked about nectar being the elixir that transforms, you know, just like you could transform, well, if you had such an elixir, you could transform iron into gold. You know, the ordinary elixir that they talk about, right, in alchemy. And then essence is like when you, like the Heart Sutra, right? In general, Hridaya in Sanskrit has been translated as heart, but Rinpoche, in more recent years, started to refer to that sutra not as the Heart Sutra, but the Essence of Wisdom Sutra. Yeah. Basically, what that means, although there's, you know, many Prajnapadamita sutras, on the perfection of wisdom, there's 100,000 verse, 25,000 verse, 8,000 verse, so forth. The Heart Sutra, as it's normally called, is you know, just maybe 3-4 pages. So all of the meaning of the entire Prajnapadamita sutras is kind of, you know, if you boil it down, you get the essence just in 3-4 pages. So similarly, all the various instructions on generating bodhicitta from, yeah, all the sutras, all the treatises, then it can be encapsulated in these 7 points and therefore it's called the essence of nectar instruction. Okay, so greatness of this Dharma. So we have the greatness of the authors and the greatness of Dharma. So the greatness of Dharma can be seen by referring back to the section on the benefits of bodhicitta and how bodhicitta is like a diamond. Okay. So, yeah, how bodhicitta is like a diamond. What it says is referring to one sutra, where that even if it's just a kind of sliver or like a shard of a diamond, it's still a diamond, and in that way, it's more precious than other kind of jewels. So similarly, even if we don't have a full-fledged bodhicitta, even if we just are kind of beginners training our mind in it, it still is a very precious teaching. It is similarly able to dispel the darkness of self-cherishing, just as even a fraction of the rays of the sun can dispel darkness. It can dispel the disease of self-cherishing, just as even a part of the medicine tree can dispel illness. In these times, when the 5 types of degeneration are commonplace and Dharma paths may not be effective, this mind training will assist you, and you will not be bothered by unfortunate circumstances. This Dharma has many greatnesses. So let's see. 5 types of degeneration to remember. The degeneration of time, the degeneration of lifespan, the degeneration of view, generation of sentient being. That's 4. Lifespan, did I mention? I did already, huh? I'm sorry. Let me look it up quickly. Okay, what do we say? Life, view, afflictions, sinning beings, and time. That's the 5. Okay? So, yeah, that's the era we're in, the Kali Yuga. So just to go into that a little bit. The generation of views means there's a proliferation of wrong views. So a lot of, whereas before, say in ancient India, the thought that past and future lives exist, karma exists, it was very sort of widespread, almost taken for granted. Now we see all kinds of views that of nihilism, that this life is it, or YOLO, you only live once, right? So again, if you're under that view, then you only work for the happiness of this life. Then there's the generation of the disturbing emotions, nyongmon. Yeah, negative emotions are becoming more strong, more powerful. Then the generation due to time, basically, yeah, as these times get more degenerate, then it's called like the eon of strife, and so our enjoyments become less, life becomes more difficult, right? Then the generation of life means there's more obstacles to living, more diseases, more war, and that. And then the degeneration of sentient beings, here in this commentary, is talking about there's decline in body, decline in merits, the decline in mind, the decline in intellect, power of recollection, and diligence. So this maybe we can see, we mentioned in the Buddha's time, then there are many sharp faculties disciples that would be able to, or were able to become arhats, attain nirvana in that very life. Yeah, so like that. So because of that, our practices aren't as effective as they used to be. And so some of you who, some of you might know, to do a particular retreat where you're reciting mantras, in the past, to do what's called the action enabling retreat, Lerum, you would then recite 100,000 mantra of whatever deity. But now it says for many of the practices, you have to recite 400,000 to get the same kind of benefit. Yeah. Okay. It starts with homage to great compassion. This is talking about the text. So most of the Indian texts, not just Buddhist, but there is a tradition to have a verse of homage at the beginning. This was for two purposes. One was at the beginning of any kind of large undertaking, you have a recognition that to have success in that project, you need merit. You need to accumulate the cause of success, and therefore to pay homage to a great being will help you accumulate merit, and that therefore you can bring that project of composing the text to completion. Yeah, in the context of Abhisamayalankara, Maitreya, who composed that text, he pays homage to Prajaparamita herself. And it also says the purpose of doing that was so that Maitreya could appear in line with other holy beings of the time who also paid homage to an object, virtuous object at the beginning of their composition. Okay. So, I'm sorry. Homage to great compassion is not being made to Avalokiteshvara. Avalokiteshvara is known as the Great Compassionate One. That's interesting, because sometimes when you hear of like His Holiness the Dalai Lama giving an initiation of Avalokiteshvara, then it'll just say like on the teaching schedule in Tibetan, Tukje Chenpo Wang. So Tukje Chenpo is great compassion, right? In general, you might have heard Ningje is compassion. Tukje is like the honorific of compassion. So the Tibetan lesson for today, right? You've heard of Tukdam, right? Tukdam, right? So Tukdam is that meditation, clear light meditation at the time of death. So Dam is to bind. Tuk is the honorific for mind, right? Or heart. So Ning in Ningje is the same as, and that's why some people translate that as heart. Sutra is Sherab Ningpo. Ningpo can be translated as heart. It can also be translated as essence. Okay. So Ningje, the honorific will be Tukje. So Tuk can be heart, it can be mind, right? So anyway. homage to great compassion. So here, I guess this commentarial tradition is saying, yeah, it's not being made to Avalokiteshvara, but is being made to the mind of great compassion. Now, the 37 practices of Bodhisattvas, another kind of mind training text, it does pay homage to Avalokiteshvara at the beginning. So, anyway, let's take let's take their word for it. But you see, Avalokiteshvara is a person, but when they talk Arya Avalokiteshvara, conventionally is the person, and you have thousand-arm Avalokiteshvara, four-arm, two-arm, so forth. But on the more ultimate level, Avalokiteshvara is the sort of embodiment of the great compassion of all the Buddhas. Okay. So, and then here it says, just as Arya Chandrakirti honored compassion at the opening of engaging in the middle way, it is great compassion that is being honored here. So that we had seen, I think we discussed that, how at the beginning, why compassion was sort of praised at the beginning of Chandrakirti's text. We mentioned that the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas are born from Buddhas. Buddhas are born from Bodhisattvas. Bodhisattvas are born from great compassion, right? So all the good qualities that we see in the world actually come from great compassion. And that's why Chandrakirti pays homage to compassion at the beginning. Okay, so teaching the preliminaries on which this Dharma depends. So at one point, you'll see in the 7-point mind training text, first train the preliminaries. So the section on training the mind and the part of the path shared with the small and medium scopes. Okay, so here, Bhupon Rinpoche is saying, I do not have to teach this all over again, as there's no difference between the way they are treated here and in the Lamrim. Then, training yourself for the 2 types of bodhicitta. There's the ultimate bodhicitta. The preserved teaching of the path say that the sharp-witted, sharp intelligence of the Mahayana lineage should train their minds by developing ultimate bodhicitta first. Now, technically, ultimate bodhicitta, you can't develop first, because technically ultimate bodhicitta is going to be the mind directly realizing emptiness in the continuum of a Arya, a Mahayana Arya, you can say, right? But here, what it's saying is the sharp-witted of the Mahayana lineage should train their minds by developing the correct view of emptiness before they have the full-fledged bodhicitta. Okay, and they will get to the point where they have the great compassion first. But as we know, bodhicitta has 2 aspirations: to liberate sentient beings and to achieve enlightenment. So you have the mind, I will free sentient beings from their suffering, but before you sort of sign up and say, I will achieve enlightenment, in order to do that, then the sharp-witted, the sharp faculty practitioners, they want to analyze whether the attainment of enlightenment is feasible, whether it's possible, right? Yeah, that's one of the distinguishing marks of them. They don't just sort of sign up without first assessing whether they can come and follow through on their promise. Okay. So here, however, the story of Mahasiddha Hasti Kovapa could repeat itself if you first discuss the training the mind through development of ultimate bodhicitta, before you have taught the other parts that deals with method. So here, I'm pretty sure we can look at the footnote, but I think this is referring to this Mahasiddha Hasti Kovapa. He once gave teachings to a king, and he taught this king the teachings on emptiness first. And the king developed wrong views, fall into nihilism, and actually killed the teacher, the Mahasiddha Hasti Kovapa. So that is why there is in the Bodhisattva vows the precept not to teach emptiness to an unripe disciple. Means a disciple who, if you teach them that things don't ultimately exist, they will fall into the view of nihilism. So anyway, I will not speak on ultimate bodhicitta mind training first. This follows the practice of tutor Sechok Ling. I shall be dealing with it later, for it is included below in the sections on the section on the six perfections. So training the mind in relative bodhicitta. The source for this instruction is the story of Maitra Kanyaka and other stories. These tell of a previous life of our compassionate teacher while he was still a learner on the path. Although he had been born in hell as a wrestler forced to pull a cart, he developed bodhicitta and so on. This, I think I mentioned the other week as well, right? How Shakyamuni Buddha, he was actually in hell being when he first developed. And here, actually, the Sergei text, we say he didn't develop bodhicitta there. He developed the great compassion. Upon generating great compassion, that in and of itself purified his negative karma to the point where he was born in the upper realm. And in the upper realm, he developed bodhicitta. But there are other systems, other textbooks. And you should know, Bogongpa Rinpoche, he was at Saramay. So I would bet, I would wager that, well, not really, but I would strongly assume that the Saramay textbook, they say that he developed bodhicitta in the hell. Okay, so then we are meditating on how self and others are equal. This is preceded by the same early sections as we had above, that is from equanimity up to the love that comes from the force of attraction. Okay. So we mentioned there's a way that we actually combine the two ways of developing bodhicitta, equalizing, exchanging self for others with the 7-point cause and effect instructions. So when that is done, then we start in the first sort of 4 steps, right? Plus equanimity. So equanimity, remembering all sentient beings have been your mother, remembering their kindness, wishing to repay their kindness, and the love that comes from the force of attraction. You do all that the same. But then, instead of just jumping into great compassion, you do the equalizing self for others. Okay. So here's a statement from the Guru Puja. There's no difference between myself and others. We do not want the small suffering, yet happiness never satisfies. Bless me to be glad at others' joy. Okay. This is equalizing ourself for others. So in other words, at present we cherish and value this thing, the thing that we call the self, but do not regard others in this way. So self and others are not equal. Not equal in terms of the amount of importance we place on them. So it is not right to make such an enormous distinction between these two. We ought to feel I and others are equal because we both want happiness and don't want suffering. At this initial stage in the technique, hardly any other reasoning is used, right? There's no difference between this stage of the mind training and understanding all sinning beings to be your mother, remembering their kindness and repaying their kindness, parts of the above sevenfold cause and effect technique. This also holds true for the final sections on altruism and bodhicitta. However, there are differences in the strength of your compassion and love through the force of attraction. These two aspects receive special treatment here. The above section on remembering their kindness only gave a method of recalling the condescending beings showed you when they are your mother. This new technique has a way of recalling their kindness when they were not your mother. This is what we talked about. So, before moving on to the interchange of self and others, you must think that self-cherishing is a fault and an unfavorable condition, and that cherishing others is a favorable condition and a good quality. Right? So that makes sense. Before we do the actual exchanging self for others, we have to see the benefits in doing such a practice. Right? How we do that, we contemplate the many faults resulting from self-cherishing. So in the Guru Puja, I see this chronic disease of self-cherishing as a cause to produce unwanted suffering. And then in engaging in the deeds of bodhisattvas, it says all worldly sufferings that have occurred stem from wanting happiness from oneself. Yeah. And that stanza continues, and all the goodness from the world has come from wanting happiness for others. So anything that befalls the worldly, any fear and suffering, all stem from self-cherishing. Why should I have this great devil? So here the root text of the 7-point cause and effect instruction, 7-point mind training says, put the blame on one thing alone. That means the self-cherishing mind. Okay. That is, all your unwanted suffering comes from your self-cherishing. Coming to grief through poison, weapons, poison, and non-human evildoers, such as God and Nagas, being reborn in hells, hungry ghosts, animals, etc. These are all due to killing other beings in the hope of gaining some gain for your own happiness, or to being miserly, or treating others with contempt. Likewise, succumbing to the diseases of the humors, wind, bile, phlegm, etc., fearing enemies, getting into quarrels, or fearing prosecution by the authorities. All these are due to gorging yourself on food because of self-cherishing or not abandoning your obsession with food, fashion, and fame. It alone is at fault with unbearable illness. When at the top of the ladder, kings, ministers, the whole countries fight, or when on the bottom rung, their subjects, families, etc., argue, or even when monks squabble, self-cherishing is at fault. So, yeah, basically, okay. Yeah, basically, when we combine this with our view of karma, yes, all suffering comes from negative actions, but our self-cherishing mind, holding ourselves to be more important than others, that is sort of working in tandem with the other afflictions, right? So, I'm a little bit worried we won't have time to go through all of this. So, yeah, let's just go quickly. Self-cherishing is like the butcher who kills your chances of higher rebirth and liberation. Yeah, I think we've gone through all this. Okay. I'll skip down to here. So this, once a man who practiced Chi usurped a place where a spirit lived. So Chi is this practice, cutting through the ego. I think they translate it. Anyway, these practitioners, they're the ones that have a big drum. You might have seen, not the Dharma is quite small, but they have a big drum, and they kind of, sing these melodious tunes where they basically invite the spirits to, even they offer their charity of their body to these spirits. In any case, because of the magic employed to stay there, the man's two benefactors one day fell into a quarrel. The man went to heal the dispute, and one of them took up a weapon and killed him. I heard this story from my precious guru. The ultimate root of such violent deaths is nothing but self-cherishing. So here, yeah, probably this is good. To sum up, all problems come from the deep-seated thought, I want some happiness, but if you do not subdue this self-cherishing, you will have no happiness. You've never before checked to see what is at the root to blame for your suffering, but it is self-cherishing. From now on, check what is to blame and look at your self-cherishing as the enemy. Practice techniques to abandon it. Okay? Yeah. Then, contemplating the many good qualities resulting from cherishing others. Here, all worldly happiness to be found comes from wishing others happiness. And the Guru Puja says, I see that cherishing these, my mothers, is the door leading to happiness, is a thought that leads to happiness, the door leading to infinite qualities. So then we have the root text saying, meditate on the greater kindness of all. So, this we had talked about, but it's worth. This is such a great sentiment. Here's a little bit different translation than what we normally discuss, but what more need be said? Look at the difference between the two. Churls, or we can say childish beings, work only for their own ends, and the sage means Buddhas only work for the benefit of others, right? So we mentioned somewhat not paradoxically, but yeah, maybe something close to paradoxically. By giving up one's own happiness, one achieves the highest happiness. By giving up the selfish thought to pursue one's own happiness at all costs, then one can achieve the highest happiness of enlightenment. And then the Buddhas totally ignore their own happiness, means they don't work with this selfish attitude and instead only benefit others, then they achieve their highest happiness. So Guru Puja has a similar type of sentiment. Yeah. Once our teacher was like us, wandering in samsara, but at some time in the past, that supreme sage began to cherish other and then progressed to fulfill both his own and others' aims by eradicating his faults and gaining the consummation of all good qualities. We, however, from beginningless time in samsara have cherished only ourselves. We have toiled and toiled thinking I want happiness, but gain nothing in return. So that is, yeah, basically the essence. If we had done what the Buddha had done and started to cherish others, then we would have had the same results by this time. just just something nice to share. This place where Prince Prakriti gave his body to a hungry tigress who was just about to eat her own cubs. Should have an S there. That place, actually, it's called Namo Buddha, or the Tibetans say Takmo Luchin, and it is in Kathmandu Valley. I actually went there on last Friday, and yeah, it's a very beautiful place. And there's a rock where supposedly the Buddha had, well, when he was still a Bodhisattva, gave his body. And one of the other students of Rinpoche has put Lama Zopa Rinpoche's picture there. So it was very nice to see. Yeah. So I'm gonna a little bit skip through because you know, in the bodhicitta module, you've gone over all these faults of self-cherishing and the benefits of cherishing others. The unique part of this 7.1 training are all these kind of pithy advice. So I want to get to that, make sure I have time to get to that. So then after doing the contemplating the faults of cherishing ourselves and contemplating the benefits of cherishing others, then we do the actual interchange of self and others. This is the Tonglen practice. This is important here, right? You see, this does not mean, so when we talk about exchanging self for others, this does not mean that you should think that the self is now others and the others are now the self, right? So it's not that, oh, now I'm you and you are me, okay? But rather, in the past, you've ignored others because you've cherished yourself. Now, the attitudes should change places, okay? Right? So the level of importance we have for ourselves, we're now going to place that same level of importance on others, yeah, and think they are the most important. And in the past, we totally ignored sentient beings, but now it's like we ignore our own selfish interests. Okay. Through this sort of familiarization process, you will be able to effect such an interchange. Think in terms of this analogy: when you stay a while on the far side of a mountain, you think that side as being the near side. Okay. So, in Tibet, remember, in Tibet, there's a lot of mountains. So they're always talking about, Tari and Suri. Ri is mountain, right? By the way, in the mandala offering, Rirap is best. So Rirap, best mountain, or like the supreme mountain, is Mount Meru. Okay. So anyway, they talk about Pari and Suri. This side and the other side. This side of the mountain, the other side of the mountain. So for us, maybe here and there is more common to us, right? So here, when I think here, I'm in Kopan now, so I'll say here it's referring to Kopan. And let's say, Shanti's in Bangalore, I'm flying to Bangalore tomorrow. Can you believe it? So tomorrow, when I arrive in Bangalore, like I'll ask Shanti today, oh, how's the weather over there? Right? And when I say that to Shanti, there refers to Bangalore. Then tomorrow, when I arrive in Bangalore, I'll say, oh, here the weather is very hot. Something like this, right? Right? So like that. Just some interesting thing I wanted to share with you. So I think many of you know Venerable Yarpel. Yeah? Venerable Yarpel. Um, he was he and his wife at the time, Elaine Jackson, they're on the very first group to go to Vajrapani land, which is just up the road from, or down the road. Anyway, it's close by to you in Northern California there. And I've known him for a few years. I met him in India a few times, and I met him again in Vajrapani when I was just there a few months ago. And we talk. Oh, how's it going? How's your practice going? How's your meditation? I was about to enter my retreat, and he mentioned that there is this commentary on Bodhisattva Charvatara called Nectar of Manjushri's Speech. It's actually a commentary by Enigma Lama. Kunsang or Pelsang, I'm not sure. I don't know his full name. Anyway, Nectar of Manjushri's Speech. He was saying, Yarpel, Venerable Yarpel was saying how he loves that book. He always travels with that book. And why? In that book, the explanation of giving and taking, and particularly in Shantideva's root text, it says how like we impute the I on the substances from our parents, right? But in the same way, we could just as easily impute the I on other sentient beings. Okay. And Yarpa was saying, and I actually, we come across, you guys know that verse, right? Some of you, that sentiment Shantideva talks about. So Venerable Yarpa was saying, for some years, you see it, you kind of get some sense. But for him, that text next to Manjushri's speech, it really helped it click for him. And so that's now what he's trying to put into practice. Anyway, I have that book on my shelf in Sera. But anyway, when he told me that, I was like, oh, I should kind of go over that section again. My initial view, right, not having read the commentary where it's supposedly amazingly, explained in an amazing way, amazingly clear, is, we come to impute these substances from our parents, and then through familiarization, we call that I, and therefore, like my happiness becomes very, very important. But in a similar way, if you were to kind of impute the I on all sentient beings, right, then my happiness would become what? The happiness of sentient beings, right? So then it becomes a way you can kind of fast track the concern for other sentient beings, because you'll be viewing other sentient beings' happiness as actually my happiness, you know? And since we're so attuned to working for my happiness, if you just have a different basis upon which to impute the I, the my, then maybe it'll help. Anyway. Okay. So here in this section, it describes the actual method to meditate on Tonglen. Right? You think I shall remove all suffering from sentient beings, my mothers, and generate compassion. Then we do this like conjoining on the breath. We visualize all their suffering being shed like hair, shaved off with a razor, and taking the form of black rays that dissolve into the self-cherishing in your heart. Right. Then it describes, more detail. You can do this for each of the realms, the 6 realms of samsara. You can do it for everyone up into including 10th level bodhisattvas. So here, the next verse from the root text: build up your taking by starting with yourself. So that means before you're able to take on the suffering of sentient beings, you can practice the taking on the suffering of suffering you'll experience in the future, and instead you say, may that ripen upon me now. Okay. So yeah, that's what it explains here. Okay, then this is a little practical point. So, you first start with yourself, and then you move on to your parents, relatives, friends, then strangers, and then enemies, and so on, until you include all sentient beings, right? So that's the normal way we train. Also, when we do the, like even metta or loving kindness meditation, you have the friend, enemy, stranger. Since it's easier to generate compassion generally to our parents, our relatives, or friends, we do it that way. Then next is strangers, or people we're indifferent to, and then enemies, right? So we do it like that. So here, Bhagwan Rinpoche giving a little advice. So sometimes we meditate starting with ourselves and moving outwards. Sometimes we can work from like the hell beings up to 10th level bodhisattvas. So just different ways that we can keep our meditation fresh. Sometimes we start with the men and women in the upper part of the valley and work down. Sometimes we start at the bottom and work up. So basically, I think the kind of skillful means employed here is, our practice can become a little bit dry if we're just engaging in it over and over again. So, just like as they say, variety is the spice of life, right? So we can also do the similar kind of practice on giving and taking, but kind of, so it remains fresh. We can, do it in these different ways. Okay. You may not really be able to take these things when you do the meditation, but it will give you great impetus to complete your merit collection. And if your mind becomes more familiar with this process, it is said, eventually you can take on these things, as illustrated by the story of Maitri Yogi. So I think Maitri Yogi was the one who, so Maitri, loving kindness, yogi, right, as you know, meditator. So Maitri Yogi was so, so advanced in his practice. Once he saw someone throw a rock at a dog, and he kind of yelped out in pain himself, as if he was actually struck by the rock. And then he showed kind of under his robe that there was a big bruise there. So yeah, some people thought, hey, why are you yelling? As if you'd been hit. But like that. Anyway, yeah, it is a little bit, this is a doubt we brought up the other week as well, right? If the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas can actually do that, why are we still suffering? So even if there might be in isolated cases, and this would make me think then, right? Did the dog not feel any pain? Anyway, that's stuff for the debate courtyard. At our level, the point is, yeah, we're not going to be taking on the suffering of others in a real kind of tangible way, but we're more training the mind to become willing to experience suffering for the benefit of sentient beings. Okay. Then there's giving. Here we've done the taking, then giving. In order to benefit sentient beings, my body shall become whatever they desire. So here, right, it says, in accordance with sutras, think that you emanate replicas of your body, which become whatever these beings desire, and send them out to the universal environment as beings. First, for the beings in the universal environment, these things emanate out in the form of soothing rains to the denizens of hell, for example, thus easing their suffering. So, yeah, I think it's a very nice practice where we can use our creativity. And when we'd already talked about it a little bit, we saw in the Lam Rim the big explanation of the various kinds of hell, hungry ghosts, animals, so forth. So we can think, in the hot hells, your body becomes like fire extinguishers that put out the flames of hell, the hellfires. For the cold hells, your body can become, blankets and fires and heating systems and all this. In the dedication chapter of Bodhisattva Charvatara, there's some very beautiful imagery we can use. Sometimes, you'll see when we recite mantras, we visualize the light rays going out in the 10 directions and purify all the sentient beings, all their suffering, spirit harm, negative karma, and so forth. I think it's a very powerful psychological technique, Yeah. So in these contexts, to be as detailed as possible, as specific as possible, not just, I'm giving all happiness, I give all my happiness to sentient beings, but think, very detailed way, what are the sufferings? What would bring happiness to those beings in those particular types of existences, right? Yeah. Hmm. So anyway, here, Paul Rinpoche gives you some ideas, right? Bodies take the form of sunlight, clothes, and so on for beings in the cold hells, food and drink for the hungry ghosts, wisdom to differentiate phenomena for animals, armor for the demigods, 5 objects of the senses for the gods. Yeah. So here, next, in your everyday life, train yourself with verses to stimulate remembrance. So yeah, this is what we had said. Here in the Guru Puja, this is that same line I had trouble finding last week. Yeah. Okay. The Avatamka Sutra, Lama Tsongkhapa also mentions this in Lamrim Chenmo, the importance of reading the sutra if we are serious about bodhicitta and bodhisattva practice. One bit for your knowledge, the so-called King of Prayers is actually taken from this larger sutra. Anyway, it's known as the flower ornament scripture, I think translated by Thomas Cleary, and it's quite thick, probably 900 pages. It had been published by Shambhala many years ago. I think Shambhala now has been bought by Random House Publishing, but I think Shambhala still exists as a separate entity, right? Anyway, flower ornament scripture. Thomas Cleary translated. So then the root text says, mount these 2 on the energy winds. So here, this is, conjoining with the breath. In other words, when you've mastered this giving and taking visualization, combine giving with breathing out and taking with breathing in. Okay. All right. So here is the sort of new material, converting unfortunate circumstances into a path for enlightenment. So these are the general times can be most beneficial when a practitioner meets with many hindrances and is unable to rid himself of them. He ought to be able to turn such unfavorable circumstances into favorable ones. Okay. Right. So converting them through analysis. Here the root text says, when the universe is full of sin, turn these unfortunate conditions into the path of enlightenment. So here, when you're faced with sickness, suffering, unfavorable circumstances, etc., you must think how these help you to achieve enlightenment. As was said, sickness, sins, and obscurations are a broom. So this is what we talked about. When we fall sick, to really feel that our negative karma ripening, and therefore that negative karma won't be experienced in the future. Okay, so that's one. Now, second way we can feel glad. You should be glad and feel, I have already been practicing giving and taking by visualizing myself taking on the sins and obscurations of sinning beings. Now I have actually managed to achieve this. And pray that the rest of their suffering may ripen on you, and imagine in your meditation this successfully relieves sinning beings of all the suffering they would otherwise have experienced for themselves. Yeah. Yeah, amazing, right? And here we said unfavorable conditions are an incentive to virtue. This next one, I think it's from the same text that I quoted before. Remember, she quoted this recently. I think abundance isn't a good translation. I think it means suffering is the manifestation of suchness. I think Rinpoche translated it like that. Manifestation of suchness. Now, here it's bringing up the kind of ultimate bodhicitta, the view of emptiness, whereby we can think suffering arises due to causes and conditions, therefore it's a dependent arising, therefore it doesn't exist independently, therefore it's empty of independent inherent existence. Okay. So this is what we had talked about, the sort of root of the mind training teachings, talking about these 5 qualities of suffering. And all right. So anyway, that was converting the circumstances through thought. Okay. Yes. Now, converting circumstances through the view. Our present text says, regard all deceptive appearances as being the 4 kayas. So here, this is what I refer to. Such a statement follows the old style of explanation from the first dissemination of the teachings, and on examination, we find it to be a little unsatisfactory. So why? When we look into the nature of any suffering that has arisen, we are told it is in the first place Dharmakaya, wisdom, truth, body, because it was not produced from anything and so forth, but I feel this misses the main point. Okay. To be brief, our happiness and suffering may have arisen from either good or bad circumstances, but when we examine their nature, these things are found to have arisen out of a mere set of causes and conditions and mutual independence. Thus, good and bad circumstances, happiness or suffering are all merely labels, and such things cannot be established by way of their own nature. Okay? So I think this is the import. Yeah. Sorry. Okay. Even though they undeniably appear to be real, when we look into the way that I and others do not truly exist, this will readily prevent our being happy, attached, and so on. If you do not understand the view of emptiness, you must think, when I die, all the happiness or sadness I may now have will only remain as memories, as if I had dreamt them. It is meaningless to be attached or hostile to in this short life. Okay. So anyway, the point is here, what I think Prabhupada Rinpoche is saying, this text, it talked about regard all deceptive appearances as being the 4 kayas. 4 kayas are the 4 sort of bodies of the Buddha. And rather than thinking that all deceptive appearances being, for example, the Dharmakaya, rather just to think all deceptive appearances are like, actually empty of inherent existence. All phenomena are empty of inherent existence because they arise due to causes and conditions. I think that's what Prabhupada Rinpoche is saying here. Okay. So now, so here I'm just going to kind of skip through until we get the actual root text. So this is actually talking about the the way to combine the two types of generating bodhicitta into steps. Okay. All right. So now our text says 3 objects, 3 poisons, and 3 root virtues. So 3 objects are the things we find attractive, repulsive, or neutral. Then the things that we find attractive, we have clinging attachment. Repulsive, we have aversion. And neutral objects, we have ignorance. Okay. So when these 3 poisons arise, we should transform them into our path by thinking that, may I, by experiencing this anger or aversion now, may all the other sentient beings be free from aversion. Okay. See. So you imagine yourself taking on their afflictions. And then you think, I've relieved all sentient beings of attachment, hostility, and being united ignorance. So now they have only root virtues. So here, the root virtue, the 3 root virtues will be the absence of attachment, the absence of aversion, the absence of ignorance. Okay. Yeah. So the point is, whenever we experience suffering, try to recall this and think that we are experiencing it for all sentient beings on their behalf, and at least having the aspiration that they be free from all their suffering. Okay. Converting such conditions to actions. Then there's 4 types of actions involved here: amassing the 2 collections, purifying obscurations, giving ritual cakes to the elementals, and invoking the good works of Dharma protectors. All right. So the 2 accumulations are accumulation of merit and transcendental wisdom. We have our purification practice. The ritual cakes, these are tormas. So if you don't know these practices very well, or maybe you've not even heard of them at all, maybe for now we can say that within Buddhist cosmology, there's many different realms, many beings that could even be existing here, but are too subtle for our karma to see them now. This would include like hungry ghosts, right? And different spirits and so forth. So there is a practice where you offer these kind of cakes to the beings in that area. Those of you who have offered soap before, you do the offering of excess soap that is going to some of these beings, right? There's also practices you can do involving a torma. Torma, like a ritual cake. Generally, before you do a retreat somewhere, you will offer the torma to the so-called landlord and say, you basically are making a deal with them, saying, you're about to engage in this virtuous practice. Here, have this ritual cake, enjoy, you ask them not to then, you're asking the landlord not to interfere with your retreat. So I'm not saying the landlord you're paying rent to. It's the same translation, shidak in Tibetan. And here, what it means is, in every kind of area, there's a kind of spirit that sort of is the lord of that land. So you're also not to take like rocks from a place without asking permission of the landlord. Okay. So this is an interesting point, right? If when you are thoroughly familiar with his mind training, you chance to fall ill, you should invoke the good works of his armor protectors as follows. My practice of giving and taking has gained new meaning because of the suffering of all sentient beings is now ripened upon me. May my sickness be even worse than it is already. And similarly, when you offer ritual cakes to the elementals, you think thus, you have been most kind to me, for you have harmed me. This is proved advantageous for my practice. I have purified my sins and obscurations, and have built up my collections even further. Now do me even more harm than before. Okay. So then, what do we think? Those not sufficiently brave who are frightened by such a thought will find themselves incapable of doing this. They should do more usual things of invoking the aid of elementals so as not to get sick and so on. Okay. So, you know, the lineage gurus, they're being very broad-minded with us. If we're not at the place in our practice where we can say, may all the suffering, get even worse, then, we can invoke the protectors and so forth to help us be free from illness. So here, next verse, or next line, immediately apply yourself to practice whatever you encounter. So whether favorable or unfavorable conditions appear, we should convert it into the path immediately. Okay. So here, teaching and practice to be applied to your whole life. So these are the 5 powers: power of the white seed, power of familiarity, power of determination, powerful of repudiation, and power of prayer. They're the 5 powers at the time of death as well. But during our kind of waking life, then determination, making this resolution: I shall not let myself become meaningless, my life become meaningless in general, and I must especially not let this happen this year, and even more not today. I should do something meaningful. I shall subdue my self-cherishing, my true enemy. So really determining that every day. Power of the white seed means to build up the accumulation of merit. Power of familiarity means everything. We should increase the bodhicitta, right? Always bringing the bodhicitta to mind. Power of repudiation. See, repudiate means to kind of refute. So whenever self-cherishing rears its ugly head, then you should apply the antidote, right? And the power of prayer is dedicating just before you go to sleep the roots of virtue you have acquired that day, so that they serve to increase your 2 types of bodhicitta. Then the 5 powers at the time of death. Here the root text says, Mahayana instruction on transference, or POA, right, concerns the 5 powers. Cherish this activity. So normally, those of you might have heard of POA practice, transference of consciousness. It was talked in the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, or the Tibetan Book of the Dead. So in general, there is a practice where either yourself or a lama can, eject your consciousness to a Pure Land. But here, in this tradition, these 5 powers it's better than even transferring the consciousness to Pure Land at the time of death. So why? Well, you see, here it says the mind training transference technique does not employ the mantras hik and pei, but is more powerful than any other transference sequence. So in general, to have the normal poa, where you transfer your consciousness to a Pure Land, you sort of, at one point, kind of almost shout hik and pei, like quite loud. And there's a yogic exercise where you actually try to eject your consciousness through your crown of your head. Now, problem is, we don't know how we're going to die. We don't know when we're going to die. And, if we're in a very sort of weakened state, maybe we're on a lot of drugs at our time of death, it can be difficult to practice poa. But practicing bodhicitta, well, and especially if we've been doing Tonglen throughout our lives when we encounter suffering, when we come close to the time of death, we can just even think, may all the suffering of sentient beings ripen on me. May all the suffering of all the beings who are dying, may it ripen on me. And may sentient beings not experience this kind of suffering in the future. In that way, it says it's a little bit easier than doing all these visualizations and injecting consciousness and so forth. And by having this virtuous state of mind at the time of death, we are sort of guaranteed that a virtuous karmic imprint will ripen and project us into a good rebirth. Okay. Okay. So here, the 5 powers at the time of death means determination, resolve not to become separated from bodhicitta in the death state, intermediate state, and so on. White seed is here giving away all of your various possessions, right? This is very important for us before we pass away. Not have attachment to any possessions we would have. Yeah. Power of repudiation, then confess and retake broken vows at the time of death. Power of prayer. So here it's not praying to go to the Pure Lands. Instead, you make prayers that will aid in the development of bodhicitta and pray that the suffering, sins, and obscurations of all sentient beings may ripen on you. Then power of familiarity. Having always familiarized yourself with bodhicitta, you leave that rebirth while in meditation on it by virtue of your mental familiarity. Then here it says you should adopt a position of lying on your right side in the lion-like posture, while transferring your mind to the new rebirth. So I think actually you lay on your right side, you block the left nostril with the ring finger and so forth. Apparently that's how the Buddha passed away. So here it's giving some advice. In general, people should perform the transference, means dying, right? The time of death, actually our consciousness is transferred to another life, to another rebirth. So even by taking refuge according to the small scope, you have a virtuous mind, and that will guarantee a good rebirth. However, someone practicing the great scope must do the transference and the like while in meditation on bodhicitta. You may think that this latter method is no way to reach the Pure Lands, but this is definitely not the case. When Chekawa was dying, he told his attendants to weekly make offerings. I have prayed to go to the hell without respite for the sake of all sentient beings, but this is not going to happen. I'm having visions of the Pure Land. Okay. So again, it's a bit, yeah. By praying to be reborn in the hells with a mind of bodhicitta, that itself creates so much virtue that uh, these great masters have visions of the Pure Lands. So, man, we're out of time. Okay, let's try. All Dharma comes within one thought. Yeah, all of which boil down, all the Dharma boils down to being antidotes to the afflictions and self-cherishing. Okay. Chief, uphold the chief of two witnesses. This is yourself and others. So sometimes the outside witness, they could say, this happens to me a lot. All right. Oh, Nancho, whatever. They put all these projections that you're a great practitioner, you're a great scholar, meditator, blah, 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 blah. But then the internal witness, how much you've been practicing, how much the delusions have been arising, how much self-cherishing has been there. So the chief of the two witnesses is the internal one. No matter if everyone is praising you that you're a great practitioner, you're a great person, a great whatever, yogi, scholar, teacher, then don't let that don't believe the hype, right? Don't believe others what they're saying. Yeah. Always cultivate mental happiness. So yeah, by being able to transform the suffering conditions into the path, then we can maintain a very mentally happy state, no matter what happens to us externally, right? Rinpoche was fond of telling a story. There's a meditator in Dharamsala, and I think once a thief broke into his room and took something. And when the meditator found out, thought, oh wow, that's so amazing, so happy because that person was able to find use in one of that meditator's possessions, Quite interesting. You have mastered it. Okay, the criterion of having trained your mind is as follows. You have mastered it if you are capable while distracted. So then even when we're doing kind of whatever worldly activities we might be doing, when we really have trained our mind in this way, then it becomes very second nature to us. You will have the 5 great signs of mastery. These are nice. The 5 great signs: being a great ascetic because you're able to be patient, a great personage because you cherish others more than yourself, a great practitioner of virtue because in all of your activities you'll never part from the practices of the 10 types of dharmic behavior. You'll be a great upholder of the Vinaya because you'll remain calm, composed, and untarnished by the least sin or non-virtue. And you will be a great yogi because you practice the real Mahayana path. Okay. So unfortunately, we're out of time. We have a practice session next week. That practice is actually the ever-flowing nectar of bodhicitta, which we went over last week. So maybe in a 2-hour session, let me see. Maybe I can just finish these commitments quickly in 45 minutes. And then we can use 1 hour and 15 minutes to do the practice. Huh? Maybe? Sound good? Let's try. Okay. So we're out of time. Maybe we're even out of time for questions. So if there are questions, write them down. And next week, we can also go over it. Okay? So now, let us just do a quick dedication. So dedicating that all the beings, vast as the vastness of space, may quickly be free of all their suffering of body and mind, and attain the state of enlightenment as quickly as possible. Let's also dedicate for the quick return of Mamzo Rinpoche. May he come back in a form that we can interact with, a form that we can receive teachings and guidance from. And may Rinpoche's next manifestation in the world show the aspect of being a very great yogi, practitioner, scholar, and be of utmost benefit for sentient beings. Then the gurus that still remain in the world, like His Holiness Dalai Lama, may all of these gurus have long and healthy lives, stable lives, and continue to benefit us with their teachings and their example. And then, yes, for the 2 types of bodhicitta, especially to ripen in our minds and the minds of all sentient beings without even a second's delay, and that altruistic wish, or the 2 types of bodhicitta that has already been generated, may it only increase. Okay, so thank you very much. And yeah, we'll see you next week. Okay.
Thank you, Ramcham.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Mary Ellen.